news to those just joining us who haven't seen us in the past or not frequently. Tonight's a special episode, unfortunately, because there's so much stuff going on regarding anti-Semitism internationally, and we're going to focus on the indoctrination of anti-Semitism by CUPE, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, which anybody who's not familiar with the union, particularly those who are not in Canada, this is 280,000 members, and CUPE is trying to get them to vote yes for BDS, to officially, as a union, support BDS. We'll hear more about that shortly when our guests are on. We do have some guests tonight. Which includes Ron East, who's the founder and the editor of the JCA, which is Canada's real Zionist, Jewish-oriented, pro-Israel news source, as well as our attorney, Michael Tepper, who's been with us before. And shortly, we'll introduce another guest at the end of this little video. A special guest tonight will be with us. We'll talk in a little bit about Ryan. But you want everybody to know that last night there was a webinar which I had the unfortunate experience of viewing the entire 1.5 hours of their plea to the union members to vote for BDS. And not only BDS, but a whole litany of anti-Semitic concepts and anti-Israel and anti-Zionism. So from this 1.5 hours, I've edited it down so y'all could witness about 12 minutes of it, which is about the most I would subject anybody to have to listen to it. And after this, we'll introduce our other guests for the evening. And next week is the official convention of CUPE. So what CUPE is the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and they proudly proclaim the following from their leadership. This isn't just from members. Viva, viva infantara. Fuck Israel, supporters of Zionism. Oh, dogs, oh, garbage. That's what they say when they're not trying to get people to vote in favor of BDS. What boils my blood are the traitors who are willing to address Zionist audiences, and Jews are not allowed to rule over our lands. As if there's any chance that we want to rule over their lands. They have plenty of lands. They have something like 40 countries. They have 7 which are Islamofascist, which we can't visit. So certainly the concept in of itself of that commentary is ludicrous, to say the least. So without any further ado,
have these ongoing conversations about what it means to be in solidarity with Palestinian people,
and this is from last night's podcast that they presented on Zoom conference.
Palestinian workers, and with the global movement calling for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israeli goods to support Palestinian freedom and Palestinian liberation.
So that's the human rights representative who's a blatant anti-Semite.
This is a really important conversation for us to have, especially ahead of resolution number 70 at the CUPE National Convention, which starts next week. And I want to just take a minute to read the resolution, because I think it's important to understand the context of what we're going to be doing. And so the resolution says that CUPE National will support the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and their demands to, 1, end Israel's military occupation and colonization. 2, grant Palestinian refugees their UN-stipulated right to return to their home and properties. 3, recognize full equality for Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel. And number 2, work with unions and civil society to demand the Canadian government to exert pressure on Israel to stop violating international law end building and expanding settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, and ethnic cleansing of indigenous Palestinians. And finally, number 3, support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign until Israel abides by international law.
You know, again, it's interesting that all these things, although they're blatantly lies, why does that have anything to do with CUPE? And the reason is because what the Palestinian people do is they staple themselves to the back of other causes to give themselves some sort of credibility, and they're incredibly successful at attaching to Black Lives Matter, to Asian Lives Matter, to everything other than Jewish Lives Matter. And this is the president of CUPE Ontario.
What we must do to support our comrades, our brothers and sisters in.
You'll notice throughout this entire 10 minutes that you'll hear and 45 minutes out here, they use the term comrade over and over. Different speakers refer to comrades, which certainly is a underlying kind of a socialist concept to begin with.
In Palestine, and as we continue to oppose apartheid regimes in Israel or anywhere in the world.
Well, in Israel, but not anywhere in the world. They're not talking about Russia, they're not talking about China, they're not talking about North Korea. They say anywhere in the world, but yet they don't do that. They just focus on Israel.
Thank you.
Now, this Rory Gill, the president of CUPE Alberta, those who want to, take a moment, go look him up. He's the most blatant, outspoken anti-Semite in the group. Yet what I spared you of his whole soliloquy on how we also oppose anti-Semitism. I just couldn't bear to listen to it again.
But I simply can't emphasize enough that if people are looking for something that they can do is to learn about boycott, divest, and sanctions and become part of it. And Karen's talked about the resolution that I hope, very much hope, will make convention for Easter Convention Tuesday, the National Convention, and we can support this. We can take the decision that the Ontario made at the division level national, because unless we can convince people that they can make a personal action and not support Israeli companies and companies that are in the occupied territories, and use that as a critical mass to get disinvestment, and it works. I can tell you, it absolutely works. The boycotts have led to large corporations stopping investment in the occupied territories. And of course, the next step is to get to that critical mass and convince governments that we need to have sanctions and we need to change the Israeli state.
His comment, though, that it works, it does work, because we know this is similar to what happened in the 1930s, where the German people and the unions and the business said, don't buy from Jews, don't go to Jewish jewelry stores, don't go to. So by the time Hitler came into power, he was already set up for the government because the people already were anti-Semitic. And that's exactly what CUPE is trying to do in Canada.
Thank you so much, Rory. And I'm just so honored to be working for CUPE members who insist on having these conversations and not falling into this false idea that to critique the state of Israel is to be anti-Semitic. When we critique the state of Canada, we are not somehow racist towards Canadians. And similarly, when we critique the policies of a nation state that continues to insist on apartheid rule and apartheid practices, we are not being anti-Semitic. And so I'm just deeply honored to be serving CUPE members across Canada.
Let me interrupt for 1 second. Sorry, Kimberly, I started to cut you off there, but she's introducing Anna Lippman. And certainly Anna is the high point of the evening because she is their Jewish spokesperson for anti-Semitism.
You can speak a bit about BDS and the ways in which the Canadian state is complicit in Israeli apartheid. And the ways in which the Canadian state is complicit in Israeli apartheid.
Yeah, I had to just back up to that. You remember, Canada itself is complicit with Israelis' apartheid. I don't quite get the connection, and I listened to that line over and over, but perhaps we could discuss that a little bit later. And here's Anna.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me here tonight.
By the way, she is a PhD candidate right now, and she's a member of every progressive Jewish organization that you can list.
Share my screen with y'all so you don't have to stare at my face the whole time.
What a shame.
Yeah, I am super proud to be here, super proud member of CUPE and 3903. You know, I think my union has done some really great work around this issue, and I'm stoked for more labor folks to get into the conversation. So, you know, I think what's really important to note is that labor has always been at the forefront of social justice movements, right? Like,
right? Well, maybe not.
Labor's done so much for things like the 40-hour work week, the weekend, workers' comp, maternity leave, things like that, right? Because as workers, we realize that our humanity and our human rights is deeply embedded in how we organize, right? So it's really important to recognize that Palestine and the issues of Palestinian solidarity are really no different than any other social movement that labor gets behind.
I couldn't resist the temptation to just have her, how animated and how emotional and passionate she is when she speaks.
Idea in how both Canada and Israel built their nation states as good people who came to an empty place and built it up, right? While completely sort of erasing the history and humanity of the Indigenous people that were in those spaces before, right? So, you know, it's really difficult for Canada to condemn Israel while it's simultaneously upholding the same ideologies.
And we're going to get a professional opinion on that from Mr. Ryan Belrose in a little while, but let's just conclude this entertaining video.
Yes, thank you, Anna.
Yes, everybody together, thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much. And now I'm going to invite Mo Al-Qassam to the conversation. Mo is a Palestinian community organizer based in
I think that Mo, Larry and Curly would be offended that he even has that name.
Toronto and a graduate of York University. Originally from Nablus, Palestine, Mo is active in many parts of the Palestine solidarity movement, including the BDS movement, building support for Palestinian prisoners, and organizing on university campuses in the labor movement and the Arab community. Mo is also currently serving as the president of CUPE 1281. He is also the Young Workers representative on the executive board of CUPE Ontario.
The person who gives the best talk from CUPE, I think we should give him a CUPE doll.
He's an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement and a writer who occasionally contributes his political analyses on the Palestinian national liberation struggle. So Mo, we want to invite you now to speak for a few minutes about recent events in Palestine and the importance of labor solidarity.
And the capitalists. Very often when we look at the situation in Palestine, or what folks could also refer to as Israel proper, we see that employers will hire Palestinian labor or Palestinian workers and pay them much lesser than their Israeli counterparts. We very much also always see how in the Israeli labor world, the largest federation of labor, so-called Israel.
In so-called Israel. I mean, it's kind of an interesting, I mean, I don't even think he appreciates the fact that that's what he just said, because it flows so smoothly from his lying tongue.
Does not reserve or have the same rights for Arab workers and Palestinian workers as they do for Israeli Jewish workers.
How do you address some of the polarizing ways that some people interpret this conversation or take this conversation? And how can you reassure the people that you're organizing with, that you are building with, that the demand for BDS is a just demand?
Again, the whole point of that question is to tell them how to respond to people with brains who oppose BDS. Anna, take it away.
Anything that, says that myself, like, as a Jewish person,
no comment,
cannot be safe unless someone else's safety, like the Palestinians, is taken away, and it brings it in this like zero-sum sort of game where, our humanity is at odds with each other. That just is a untrue and false kind of binary framing of the issue, right? I think it's important to recognize that, we are all stronger when we support all of us, right? And so, again, bringing it back to that shared humanity and that shared struggle, and recognizing that we all have a role to play in that.
Take it away, Gil.
And Israel as a government, and Israel as the fourth largest military in the world. And I believe that Israel is a country, and it is a nation, and it makes decisions.
That's prophetic. It's a country, it's a nation that makes decisions.
And its citizens. And we should acknowledge this. 95% right now of citizens back what's going on. And that's another reason that we need to work so hard on BDS to get a change there.
I'm just curious where he got that 95%, and I don't even know if he's referring to 95% who agree or disagree with BDS or with the government. He's pretty vague on that whole commentary.
But I met many people in Israel.
He didn't meet many people, but he met many people, and that's a lot. That's twice as many as many.
Who don't support, and Israelis who don't support what their government and their military is doing. And I met people who had left the IDF because they could not support it, and they knew what was going on, they knew it was oppression. So it is the possibility to confront governmental decisions, national decisions, and separate that from identity. And I don't pretend that part is easy. I've talked about the non-complicated issue of the occupation.
Non-complicated issue. Yeah, it is not complicated, but that's a whole different story.
I understand there's complexities, and that's an understatement when we were talking about anti-Semitism and how it affects us all. But I truly believe we're talking about the actions of the state. And as I say, I will confront anti-Semitism wherever it is, and I'll stand up against it, and I'll stand with those fighting it. But I'll also have to acknowledge the actions of the Israeli state and what it does on a daily basis, which is oppress the Palestinian people.
The very important part here is that BDS and the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, or the Palestinian Liberation Struggle, make a very important distinction between a political movement, which is Zionism, and Judaism, which is a religious identity and has no religious identity. We understand the difference. We refuse the conflation.
But yet he says that Jews shall not run our lands. He doesn't say Zionists, Israelis. He's quoted as saying Jews, not Zionists, not Israelis, not anything. So he's a little bit disingenuous, to say the least.
Is used cynically to repress other people, and not to speak for other folks in the same tone. But many other comrades and siblings from the Jewish community.
That's the fourth time someone said comrades in the first 15 minutes of this hour-and-a-half video.
They also make that distinction, and they reject deconflation, which is a very important part. And this distinction and the rejection of conflation is part of the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, and it is it's for us seeking to live side by side with other folks, with comrades, with siblings, under the same rights.
We must stand together. And then when people ask for our help because they are suffering an injustice, part of our job is to provide whatever solidarity we can for them. It's connected so deeply to the work we all do as trade unionists.
And that is the success of BDS, is making believe that other causes have any relationship whatsoever to the Palestinian terrorists who want to destroy Israel.
All right. I just want to, again, thank our international solidarity committees. I think this is the start of something that is much needed in this union, and bringing our regions together to talk about solidarity across the globe is really important. And nothing is more pertinent than the issues that are occurring for our friends in Palestine. And so when Resolution 70 does hit the floor, I certainly encourage all of our delegates to vote yes. Make sure you push the pro-like button right away as soon as you can if you want to get in line and speak. And like I said, I really hope that that international solidarity committees across the country can come together so that we can build solidarity amongst ourselves to do more and to be active in supporting the positions that we take on the convention floor. Thank you.
But as I say, the occupation's been going on for 2 years longer than I was born, and that was not the beginning of it. The beginning was 1948, the creation of Israel.
In the words of Black feminist June Jordan, who is one of my ancestral mentors, she wrote in her poem, Moving Towards Home, in solidarity and with solidarity with Palestinian peoples. And she said, I was born a Black woman, and now I am become a Palestinian. Against the relentless laughter of people, there is less and less living room. And where are my loved ones? It is time to make our way home. So from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And I thank all of you for being with us and for sharing space. And for CUPE members, we will see you at National Convention next week. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and we will talk to you. Take care.
It will be our pleasure a little later this evening to introduce Ryan, who really is the right person to discuss this whole issue of indigenous peoples, since he actually is indigenous people as opposed to the Fakistinians.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you. There's a lot we're going to be discussing. We have great people with us on the show tonight that we're going to be getting into this issue about CUPE, also about the TDSB. There's a lot that we have to discuss. And as you saw in the short clips that we showed, it's very serious what's going on with CUPE. That this week going forward, they're going to have their national convention, and they want to pass a resolution, an anti-Semitic resolution, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So it's a major threat. Who is the BDS? The BDS National Committee is composed of various terrorist organizations, including Hamas and PFLP. And when there's going to be a resolution presented, it's basically endorsing Hamas. The majority of those who call themselves Palestinians in Judea and Samaria or in Gaza, they identify with Hamas. All the polls have shown that. There's absolutely no question about it. There was a horrific terrorist attack today that took place against a Jew in Jerusalem. And they're jumping for joy. The BDS and Hamas supporters, they're celebrating this. They're giving out candies. And they're rioting right now in parts of Jerusalem, parts of East Jerusalem right now. Every episode that we have, there's a picture of Eliyahu David, who was murdered today, and it's a tragedy. And he was engaged to be married. In fact, he's in his mid-20s. He was in the Old City today, and he also serves as a tour guide. And you had an Islamic so-called scholar that's a leader with Hamas in their political division, carrying a machine gun, shooting Jews. And he's being praised throughout the internet. We have some footage that we're going to show, in fact, about that. But every week we always bring the Parsha in that's discussed, read in every single synagogue throughout the world, and relate it to what's going on. So this week's Parsha, well, just read yesterday in the synagogues, was Parsha Vayishlach. And this is about Yaakov and his children, that they're entering back into Israel. There was a famine, there were all kinds of problems, and he's running from Esav, and he's hiding, and anyways, he's coming back to Israel. I'm not going to read the entire Parsha, but I am going to point something out that I think is very pertinent in terms of responsibility that we have for one another. And so it says, the fifth aliyah, Dinah went out, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Yaakov, to visit the local girls. She wanted to go out. She wanted to see what's going on with the local people in town, the local women. She was seen by Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, who was the prince of the land. He's the prince of the land. He's the prince of that area. Obviously, he's got supporters. He's got security. He's got people. Who was the prince of the land? He took her, was with her, and he raped her. He became attached to her, the daughter of Yaakov. He wanted her. Shechem spoke to his father, Hamor, saying, "Take this young girl for me as a wife." Yaakov heard that he had raped his daughter, Dinah. So after Yaakov's sons came back, they were in the field, they came back, Yaakov revealed it to them that Shechem had raped his daughter, their sister. So Shechem appeals to Yaakov. This is very public, what's going on. Appeals to Yaakov. He says, I want to marry her. I want her to be my wife. Where is Dinah while this is going on? She's held captive. She's not there for any meeting. And they're negotiating. Shechem is negotiating with the sons of Yaakov, the fate of Dinah. And the sons, they say, you know what? They figure out a plan. They're determined. They're going to free her. They're going to set her free. So they look at Shechem and they say to him, you know what? This is what we'll do. If you want to marry her and you want all of us to intermarry each other's, we'll take your daughters, your women, you'll have our women, back and forth. We can't do it unless you get circumcised. Because if you're not, there's no deal. So Shechem thinks, you know what? I think I got it over these guys. Let's do it. Tells all his people, let's do it. On the third day, after they became circumcised, Shimon and Levi, two of the brothers, two of the sons, they descend into town to free her. Now, it's not a walk in the park to just go and grab her. They have to go through all the security, all the guards and everything. And what they did, they killed them all in order to free her. Now, you may like this, you may not like this, people who are watching this, but that's what happened. And I pose it to you. What is the responsibility that we have? Should we turn a blind eye and just let people do whatever they want? A terrorist attack today being celebrated by the BDS, by all the Hamas supporters, giving out candies. And I remember my first time I was in Israel, 1980, in May. I intended to spend my first Shabbat in Kiryat Arba and walk down into Hebron to pray with the Jewish women Friday night to make Kiddush for them. Rabbi Levinger's wife, Miriam Levinger, was living there, and there weren't so many Jews living there at all. There was just the beginning of Jews returning to Hebron. And I wanted to join Jewish students that Friday night, May 2nd, 1980, to make Kiddush and sing some Shmiras Jewish songs Friday night with the Jewish women. Unfortunately, the plans got derailed. And there were detailed plans. Everything was set. The plans at the last minute got derailed. And I stayed in Jerusalem that Shabbat. But that Shabbat, the Jewish students that walked into Hebron from Kiryat Arba, they were massacred. They were massacred with grenades and machine guns. There was a student, a yeshiva student from Montreal, who was there also, who was murdered. And I remember in Hebron, Arabs in Hebron, who called themselves Palestinians, they were giving out candies. They were celebrating. So when I see those pictures of celebrations taking place today, I know what's going on. And I want you to know what's going on. So with this parsha, when you see that action was taken, when they're the ones who raped her, made it public, they thought they're having a good time. Look at Yaakov and his sons. We took your sister. We took your daughter. We raped her. This is what we should do to your people. And the sons said no. Two of the sons said never again. And they took action. This is a show about action. And what's going on with the BDS and CUPE and all the threats and all these BDS leaders that made their presentations at the CUPE Zoom presentation last night, they have no problem with this anti-Semitism. Absolutely not. In fact, there's been an uptick in attacks on Jews throughout the world. Throughout Canada, Jews at a restaurant, Jews counter-protesting, mobs of BDS supporters with clubs, rocks, and chains attacking Jews. In restaurants in New York, in patios, in Los Angeles, all over the States. Same thing, Jews being attacked. You wear a kippah, you're identified with Israel, you're going to be attacked. And that happens. Throughout campuses, Jews are being attacked. We can't turn a blind eye, and we have to act. We have to act with our heads. We have to think, but we have to be determined as we move forward. We got great people joining us tonight, and we're going to be talking about these issues. So if our doctor in the studio could bring them on, and we could all be discussing the outrageous anti-Semitism, BDS anti-Semitism, and lies that these CUPE leaders are saying, and that there has to be action taken to derail that resolution at the conference.
Good. We'll bring everybody on, maybe in reference to the commentary of the candy being handed out. I think even as or more disgusting is a young child who basically is a student of the Hamas terrorist who murdered the tour guide. and he's saying, he's crying, he was a good man. He never cursed anyone except the Jews. May Allah burn them. I mean, that's what they're teaching these children.
أستاذ أحلى بني آدم بالدنيا الله يرحم روحك إن شاء الله بكون مسؤول الجنة يا أستاذ الله يرحمك شو ولا صلاة النبي الله يحميه الله يرحمه حياتي دينية ولا شيء وهيك لما يكون في إشي نحتفل معه ما كان شيء بالمسجد كان منيح الله يحميه.
Let me interject there and just add this point, and I'm sure everyone with us tonight will agree that what that kid said, those students from that Valley Park High School that had the Free Palestine protest last week, they identify with that kid. They identify the same anti-Semitism being a major staple throughout the BDS movement, throughout the Free Palestine movement. That same vicious anti-Semitism. Let's bring them on. Good evening, Ryan.
Hey, how's it going?
Good seeing you, Ron, too.
Good evening.
And we'll see Michael also. Ryan, let's go with you first. I mean, you watched the video of CUPE. You know what these guys are about. They want to get anti-Semitism accepted into the workplace.
Yeah, look, that's exactly it. Like I did see in the comments that one of the audience members here, Hanita, she wrote a very prescient post. I mean, why is it so important to these organizations to mainstream BDS? Like, what is it that makes them want to make people accept anti-Semitism in any way, shape, or form? It's always like, I know you know this, Meir. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but it's really interesting to me that these people are always, they say the same three things. It's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. Nobody's saying it is. But what is anti-Semitic is criticizing Israel using double standards and demonizing them and basically making up bullshit. Like, it's not anti-Semitic to say that there's some problems in Israel, and it's not anti-Semitic to say that the Arabs do have some legitimate beefs. It is anti-Semitic to make up absolute nonsense. And you know what? It's anti-Semitic to hand out candy after a Jewish kid is murdered. Like, what the hell is wrong with these people?
Absolutely.
You know, and I think part of my problem, and one of the reasons I've kind of gotten a little bit away from doing advocacy so much, is because it's frustrating for me to have to watch this nonsense and have to listen to these people just basically flat out lying. I mean, they couldn't find a more eloquent Jewish person to pretend to be Jewish so they could beard for their anti-Semites. They had to pick somebody that every second word is Like, I'm sorry, I can't watch this stuff anymore. It makes my head want to explode. And you know, like, I have to sit and listen to these people claim to be indigenous. They don't have no clue what indigenous even means.
Right.
And they're claiming that they're the indigenous people. They're Arab colonizers. The history is clear. I can't be any more clear than that. They colonized the entire Middle East, North Africa, and a bunch of Europe. And I'm supposed to listen to them claim to be indigenous while they tell Jews that you're colonizers from Europe. This is the kind of stuff that I don't have the patience for it anymore, Meir. Like, I salute you because you've been doing this a lot longer than me. And I got to tell you, man, like, maybe it's because I lost a very good friend to being stabbed by a terrorist. You know, like, Ari Fuld was a good friend of mine. And maybe this is bringing up a lot of stuff that's really, you know, I got to say, it's making me really angry. I'm watching this and I'm just like, come on, like, enough's enough already.
Brian, did you make a presentation years ago at the UN about the indigenous?
We were supposed to speak at the UN. We had everything all set up, and basically we got derailed because a group of well-meaning leftist radicalist Jews who were anti-Jewish decided that it was going to be too inflammatory, and they actually speaking credentials pulled. And literally all we were going to talk about is the fact that we need to have consistent standards when we're determining indigenous status, which is something that every single indigenous activist I know, even the ones that disagree with me on a lot of things, they still agree that we need to have consistent standards when we're determining who's indigenous and who's not. The problem is that when you do that, you end up with, you're automatically, look, I always laugh because there's so many people that try to argue with me about Jewish indigenous status, right?
Yep.
So you're trying to argue with me about Jewish indigenous status, but the facts are all on my side. So they can't, like, if we apply consistent standards, it's automatic that, yeah, the Jews are indigenous and the Arabs are indigenous to the Hijaz. So they can't have consistent standards.
Right.
So,
right.
You know, like, and sorry, I get kind of frustrated when I talk about this stuff now, because it's an argument, but it's not supposed to be an argument. Like, these are just facts. I'm listening to these CUPE idiots, and I mean, good Lord, these are people that are educating kids. I don't think the Jewish community really understands, if this nonsense goes through, all the advocacy from the last 10 years means nothing, and all the advocacy for the next 10 years will be directly trying to fight this, because they will be educating kids and basically putting this bullshit into their minds, and we're going to have to fight that. And all these organizations that raise millions of dollars and pay these hundreds of thousands of dollars in salaries,
right,
they are ineffective, and they are not addressing the real problem. And we're stuck at the grassroots level trying to fight this fight, not with one hand tied behind our backs, with both hands tied behind our backs.
Right.
You know,
right.
And we have, look, this is the other thing that's really frustrating. We have smarter people on our side. We have the facts on our side. And yet we're still fighting as if we are the ones that are, like, you know, coming up with these crazy outlandish things. No, we're just stating facts. But now these idiots, like, that's a teacher. Think about that. Those people in that video, those are teachers that are saying this stuff. So is it any wonder that a lot of these well-meaning idiots are taking this stuff and just believing it?
Right.
So,
right.
I know I'm sounding a little bit strange.
Guys, you can jump in. This is an open discussion.
Yeah. Listen.
We're all skilled on this topic. We're all going to discuss it. Go ahead.
Every time I have the opportunity to listen to Ryan, you know, I want to be quiet and absorb what Ryan has to say. He's got a lot of interesting opinions, and you know, sometimes to see somebody from outside the community, you know, speak the way that Ryan speaks, allows us also from in the community to maybe open up our minds a little bit more and pay a bit more attention. Listen, CUPE has been doing this for a long, long time.
Yeah,
this is not something new. I've been here in Winnipeg, you know, fighting against these CUPE events that have happened here in Winnipeg. Regular speakers are coming to the CUPE hall, all at BDS, all anti-Israel. You're speaking about these teachers that we just saw here. Ask yourself, where have they been educated in Canadian universities? What are Canadian universities? What are they propagating? What are they teaching our students? What have we been fighting in York University, at Toronto University, University of Manitoba? I can go on and on and on. That's the product of what comes out of our universities. So I'm not surprised that this is the language that they're using, and this is the topic that they're using. You know, my question to CUPE is, how many resolutions did they pass regarding equality in pay between regular Canadian and Indigenous Canadians? How many resolutions were passed about BDS and Hamas until they stopped throwing homosexuals off the tops of roofs? How many resolutions were passed demanding that the PA stop demolishing homes of Palestinians without judicial review? How many have been passed? You know, if you want to be even-handed, if you want to claim, you know what I always love? People have to begin by telling themselves that they're not something. You know, I'm going to tell you right now that we're not anti-Semitic. Before I begin to tell you I'm anti-Semitic stuff, I'm going to start by prefacing, telling you that what I'm about to tell you is not anti-Semitic. So believe me when I tell you it's not anti-Semitic, because I'm about to tell you that it's something anti-Semitic, but just trust me, it's not anti-Semitic. Right. And then I'm supposed to sit there and go, wow, okay, this woman, you know, is telling me something, you know, honest and truthful, especially when you use the word comrades. You listen, that's what CUPE and that's what labor is all about, right? It's a Marxist, socialist movement to begin with. And, you know, and everything has been co-opted and been, you know, coerced by the pro-Palestinian movement in the West. What's funny to me, and Mary, I said it to you before, and then I'll let Michael jump in, is that as the Arab world is warming up to Israel and recognizing that the 70 plus years of waste was not because of the Jews in Israel, was because of the Palestinians and their position, you know, which caused the rift within the Arab world. It is the Western world that is turning on Israel. And when you ask yourself, why is that happening? Ask yourself, what immigrants and what migration from those Arab countries have come into our countries, and what kind of philosophies and hate have they brought with them, into our country. Because as I mentioned to you, Meir, before, when you watch all these kids that are marching in Toronto, in Winnipeg, Vancouver, and elsewhere, these are kids that have been born and raised in Canada. They weren't born in Gaza. They weren't raised in Gaza. They wasn't raised in what they consider to be an open prison or a concentration camp. And yet they go out there and, and they're full of hate and anger and hate toward Jews and Israel. And then you ask yourself, where are they learning it? They didn't learn it back in Gaza. They didn't learn it back in the West Bank. They're learning it here, right here at home, in their mosques, in their schools, in their homes, from their friends, and from the family. That is the problem that we need to address. And I'll let Michael jump in.
Thank you, Ron. I'd like to offer a little bit of background as to why unions are allowed to engage in this kind of activity in the first place. Because the purpose of a labor union is to secure better working conditions and better pay for their members. It's not to engage in international campaigns, much less campaigns with anti-Israel and anti-Semitic overtones. But the reason that unions are unable to do this in the first place goes back to 1991 in a Supreme Court of Canada case called Levine versus Ontario Public Service Employees Union. Merv Levine was a teacher in a community college who objected to the use of his union dues for various political causes. In Canada, we have something called the RAND formula, which means that if you are in a union shop, you are required to pay union dues, but you are not required to be a member of the union or be subject to union discipline, which means in English, you have to pay the money. It gets deducted from your paycheck and goes into the union's bank account, but you don't actually have to sign up and get a union membership card if you don't like what the union's doing. The unions have, by and large, used the RAND formula as a blank check to do whatever they want. Since they have the money anyway from people who have to pay dues to the union, member or not, then they can go off and support whatever cause they like. And if they can get a affirmative vote either at a union general meeting or perhaps simply at a union executive council meeting, then they can go off and spend the money on whatever pet cause tickles their fancy. No matter how irrelevant it may be to the collective bargaining process. And that's what they're really profiting from. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court of Canada reasoning was divergent. It was for various reasons involving the Charter of Rights, and I'm not going to go into all the details because it would probably make people's brains explode. But the upshot is that there's very little chance at overturning a 30-year-old decision of the Supreme Court. There could be new social facts being introduced. BDS was not part of the fact pattern when the Supreme Court made its decision, but I think it would be a very uphill battle. I think that the primary solution to this problem is legislative at the provincial level. Manitoba legislature or the Ontario legislature could make laws that, through the Labor Relations Acts, that limit the ability of unions to spend their members' money on purposes that are irrelevant to the collective bargaining process. So that's my legal take on the matter. A few other observations, which are that CUPE started off their officials by insisting that what they're doing is critiquing the state of Israel, and that's perfectly legitimate. But that's not what they're actually doing. They're going far beyond critiquing the state of Israel. They're calling for a boycott, which is action, not simply the expression of an opinion. And the purpose of BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, is very simple. It's to make Jews in Israel poor, weak, and vulnerable to people who want to wipe them out. And that is what is really scary.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, so this convention is coming up later this week, like I mentioned, and I think they got resolution number 70, and it's horrific. And that's right. This is not just a critique of Israel or anything like this. This is to take action against Israel. This is a resolution where they don't believe Israel has the right to exist.
Mayor, it's funny, they're saying this resolution is to try to bring wage equality, and bring, Arab, they're saying Arab, Israelis and Palestinians, wage equality, so you're going to BDS the only country pretty much that gives employment to Palestinians out of Gaza and to Palestinians out of the West Bank. And you're going to BDS the country that, gives opportunity for its Arab citizens, equal opportunity as everybody else to go to get education, to be whatever they want to be. They're doctors, lawyers, nurses. You're going to BDS them. You're going to choke that lifeline that they have. And by the way, a Palestinian who works in Israel proper, even if he gets paid slightly less than what they consider to be minimum wage, and I was just researching as we were doing this, and they get paid fairly close to minimum wage, and even some of their own Palestinian organizations claim that when you look at the wage that they're getting paid, they're actually getting paid fairly close to minimum, so there really is no big disparity, according to Israeli labor laws. It's still substantially more than what they would ever get paid in the West Bank or in Gaza. That's why in Gaza today, tens of thousands of Gazans are lining up, so tomorrow morning, they can be one of the lucky few thousands that can get a permit to work in Israel. Why do they want to work in Israel? Because they get paid 3, 4, 5, 10 times more than they could ever get paid in Gaza, if they could even find a job in Gaza. So these people who are doing this BDS, they've done nothing, no homework, no looking at the impact, no SWOT analysis, no basic anything, before they come up with these statements, because hate is so prevalent. And the undertone of anti-Semitism is so prevalent, it blinds you from reality and from truth. I always tell my kids, when it comes to emotions and feelings, you can't argue it with people. And these people all, talk about emotions and feelings. And those are things that are very difficult to counter-argue.
The other aspect also is how do they get around the fact that right now it's a strange coalition government in Israel? That part of it is even with an Arab party. Where's the apartheid charge make any sense?
It doesn't make a difference. Like I said, this isn't about facts and truth. Nobody will come on and debate Ryan ever. And I've looked at Ryan's debates before, where they actually debate truth and facts. Because once they really have to get into truth and facts, they have no basis to stand on. So you're going to use emotion, you're going to use, feelings, and you're going to yell and scream loud. You're going to use the word Nazi every once in a while. And that's how you're going to win your argument. And that's how they win the argument. You think there's one CUPE member who's going home and Googling before they're going to make the vote to decide how they're going to vote? You think one of them is going to do any kind of sincere analysis before they're going to make the vote? They're going to vote just because they need to vote. Those who decide to vote are going to vote because, that's how it is. There's no education here whatsoever. Where's Bnei B'rith? Where's Sija? Where were they to demand to make a presentation equal time? Where are they there to demand, that they have a right to speak? I don't understand. I just don't get, how this stuff gets going like this, without anybody from the so-called official organizations.
Yeah, Ron, something. The thing is, we're sitting here and we're having a normal conversation right now. We're actually talking about this, in a fairly, I think, a fairly polite manner. We're not, throwing out a bunch of nonsense. Nobody's screaming and hollering or pounding a table. But we're trying to make something irrational rational. That's the problem. And when we do that, we become the irrational ones, because we're trying to make something that makes no sense make sense. These people hate Jews. Look, I used to honestly believe that most of these people were just genuinely kind-hearted people, that maybe they were ignorant and they just didn't know enough. But what I've started to come to realize is a lot of these people are ignorant by choice. I mean, we live in a time when I have more information in this than 90% of the people. 90% of the people in the history of mankind didn't have access to that kind of information, even if you combine it all, right? And so you have these people now with unions. I know in Alberta, recently they made the decision that you don't have to buy in. You don't have to opt into everything a union does, but you do have to pay your union dues for actual union stuff. But all of these unions are putting forth these crazy, just BDS. I'm sorry, but there's no foundation for BDS. There's no moral or ethical foundation for it. And there you go. See, Don Sharp in Alberta, Bill 32 passed. So now they have to opt in to allow them to use their union dues for political purposes. Because I know
Right.
I was part of a union, the telecom workers union, for a long time,
Right.
TWU.
But it's not just CUPE. Even in university dues, student dues.
Yeah,
You
oh,
know,
yeah.
I know there was a big fight here in Winnipeg, the University of Winnipeg, University of Manitoba,
Yeah.
by Jewish students and other students said, "Well, how could you use my own student fees towards
Well,
campaigns that
It's actually
that are there?"
Ron at University of Manitoba. It was a student that I know, Josh Morey.
Yeah,
He was the one that challenged University of Manitoba and said, "I'm not funding your anti-Israel nonsense anymore."
correct. Like
So-
how can you ask the victim or the person who's going to be perpetually the victim of this to pay into, you know, what's about to become his own victim? You know, it's so bizarre to me. You know, it's
Yeah.
like asking somebody who's about to being robbed, or God forbid, a woman who's about to be sexually assaulted, to open the door for the guy and let him in. Like it's ridiculous. You would never allow that in any common sense. And yet,
Yeah.
when it comes to Jews, when it comes to Israel, you know, somehow common sense doesn't apply, and for that you must co-opt and you must pay in and you must be part of it. And if you don't want to, and then they use it as a number, you know, then they say, you know, our student union 99%. You know, it's like an election in the Arab world.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just wondering
We have a special
how
guest.
some of these people who are leaders in CUPE that make these vicious anti-Semitic statements, you know, if our doctor in the studio could again show the statements made by one of those leaders, said this about Jews, and one of the CUPE leaders, his name Mo El Qassam. They made all kinds of statements.
You'll keep chatting, and I'll find it and get it on in a few minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
Anytime you want to, there's another guest who called in who would love to join us at any time you're ready. So let me know when that, and I'll go look.
Let him, Alan. That's right, Alan Skorsky from Definitive Rep. Bring him on because he was monitoring some of the Zoom last night as well.
Let me find
Okay.
him. Give me a minute.
Okay.
And just since he's joining us late and he's been on before, I want everybody to be aware of who Alan is, who's about to be on with us. He's a political consultant, an author, a spokesman. He is 50%, although he might say more like 40% of the Definitive Rep. And he's also a frequent contributor to all different Jewish press, online, offline, inline. He gets out of line, and he's a former candidate for U.S. House of Representatives. So I'm going to let Alan get on and say a few words while I find some quotations from the Palestinian Jew-hating leader of CUPE, and I think he'll get a CUPE doll for his representatives. So I'm going to let Alan get on and say a few words while I find some quotations from the Palestinian Jew-hating leader of CUPE, and I think he'll get a CUPE doll for his representatives. So I'm going to let Alan get on and say a few words while I find some quotations from the Palestinian Jew-hating leader of CUPE, and I think he'll get a CUPE doll for his representatives. So I'm going to let Alan get on and say a few words while I find some quotations from the
okay, go ahead and let him talk.
Leader of CUPE, and I think he'll get a CUPE doll for his representatives. So I'm going to let Alan get on and say a few words while I find some quotations from the
okay, go ahead and let him talk.
Leader of CUPE, and I think he'll get a CUPE doll for his representatives.
You know what? It seems like it's a loop.
Oh my gosh.
From the
okay, go ahead and let him talk.
Leader of CUPE, and I think he'll get a CUPE doll.
Sounds like a CUPE meeting.
I can't get rid of me. I don't know what's wrong. Okay, see ya. From the very weird loop. Anybody have an? Yeah, I think he'll get a CUPE doll.
Sounds like a CUPE meeting.
I can't get rid of me. I don't know.
Something happened there.
Yeah, that was weird.
That was like a CUPE meeting. Yeah, that was exactly like a CUPE meeting. Just say it a lot of times again and again and again.
Yeah, you just say BDS
when
over and
Alan
over.
is on the screen, my loop keeps going. So I think Alan, we may need to. Let's try
That
again.
was exactly like a CUPE meeting. Just say it a lot of times again and again and again.
Yeah, you just say BDS
When
over and
Alan
over.
is on the screen, my loop keeps going. So I think Alan, we may need to. Let's try
That
again.
was exactly like a CUPE meeting. Just say it a lot of times again and again and again.
Yeah, you just say BDS
When
over and
Alan
over.
is on the
Start
screen,
looping.
my loop keeps going. So I think
Probably
Alan,
just unplug your microphone and go with the microphone on your computer.
Yeah, you just say BDS over and over.
Hey, Alan, let's get off and
This
read.
is funny.
Alan,
Probably just unplug your microphone and go with the microphone on your computer.
Yeah, you just say BDS
Okay,
over
I
and
say we
Hey,
go to
Alan,
the vote right away, CUPE members. Let's do the vote right away.
Probably just unplug your microphone and go with the microphone on your computer.
It's like a skit of who's on first. Members, let's do the vote right away.
Probably just unplug your microphone and go with the microphone on.
Oh my Lord! Oh,
Gotta love technical issues.
Oh,
Yes,
great
gotta love
technology.
it. That was something. That was definitely something. But no, it's all good. Alan's a great guy. Hopefully, he can come back in. He's got great insight into all things relating to BDS and CUPE, I'm sure, and some of the other stuff, especially if you watched it last night as well.
He did.
That takes a lot of patience.
It does indeed take a lot of patience. You know, while we're waiting, I guess, for them to come back on, and hopefully they'll come back on sooner than later. Meir, you know, coming back to what happened today in Israel, you know, and to the terrorist attack that happened in Jerusalem, there was another one that happened in Jaffa. Yeah, another stabbing attack in Jaffa that happened right around the same time. Now, one thing that people don't know about this particular person, the 42-year-old Palestinian in Jerusalem who killed the 26-year-old Israeli, he was actually employed by the city of Jerusalem as a teacher in the Arab schools to teach Arabic and also to teach religion outside of his regular sermons that he was doing in mosques all over Jerusalem and in the West Bank. And you can actually go on YouTube and see some of his sermons. And when you start seeing some of his sermons and you start seeing the language that he was using, it is not surprising that a man like him ended up committing a terrorist act like he did. What's amazing is how the media has been reporting on this terror attack, if they've been reporting it at all. And, you know, a recent study showed that less than 5% of terror attacks in Israel are even mentioned, and they're only mentioned if there's a Palestinian casualty involved in some fashion. And if you looked at CNN today, if you looked at a lot of the other AP, some of the other news outlets out there, you know, they didn't mention anything of this being a Palestinian terrorist who murdered, you know, Jews. This was, you know, a Palestinian was shot dead, 4 Israelis injured, 1 Israeli killed. You know, it doesn't give you the full scope, but it tell you a shooting, you know, occurred, and, you know, and it makes it seem as if there was some even-handed here, or somehow perhaps the Israelis were somehow equally responsible for the carnage that occurred. And I think that's part of the problem, because the majority of Americans, Canadians, and others don't tune into your show or to other shows like yours to get their news. They get the news from CNN and other sources. And when those sources, you know, change the language of how they tell the story, the whole narrative becomes very different. Or to other shows like you to get their news. They get the news from CNN.
Absolutely.
Do we fix the loop?
Alan, you're on. You can't hear you, though.
No, it's got to be.
Hear you.
You know what? It's got to be. Unplug his microphone. That's. Just go with the mic on the computer.
Yeah.
Or we just look at him.
Yeah.
And he looks beautiful, and that could be nice too. Where did Michael go? Did we lose Michael, by the way? Sorry to be doing technical stuff, but
I noticed that my internet's been dropping since I've been here in Toronto too. It's funny, Toronto's internet's worse than Paddle Prairie's.
That's crazy. That's what's I was wanting to ask Michael, you know, a little bit about what's happening with the Toronto District School Board as well, and see, you know, what's occurring the last few days. I know today there was a grassroots initiative of at least, I think, some kind of a protest or a gathering. Oh, we can hear him now. Okay, perfect.
Hi, Alan.
Hey guys, how are you?
I'm good.
You're doing your best. It's not your fault. It's not malpractice. It's just technology.
I know.
Anyhow, so, you know, Meir, you turned me on to CUPE, because I'd never heard of them before you sent me the link. So I did watch most of the webinar last night, and there were 2 things I picked out of there. I don't remember the names of the characters who were on, but you had the one gentleman who was holding his baby who came up from Scotland and now works with the union, and he said that what got him involved in this cause was when he was a child and he watched the Sabra and Shatila massacres, and this is what he saw as an injustice to the Palestinians. Of course, he didn't know that prior to Sabra and Shatila, the PLO had terrorized Lebanon for years, and this was the Christian phalangists exacting revenge. Rightly or wrongly, the Palestinians are not victims. Before Lebanon, they took over Jordan and Saddam Hussein threw them out. The last speaker of the evening, I don't know what his name was, but he was of Arab descent, and he said that, and he did what they all do. They hijacked other causes, just as the Palestinian cause, or I can call them Palestinians, but the Arabs under the PLO hijacked George Floyd. Then they hijacked Kyle Rittenhouse here in Wisconsin. There was a rally this morning to protest the verdict, and there were Palestinian flags there. They've hijacked, and then last night he said he drew a parallel between the labor cause and the Palestinians. And he said that just as people who are work for unions, they are victims of oppression from corporations and employers, so too are the Palestinians victims of Israeli oppression. And they have mastered the art of hijacking every radical, communist, left-wing cause to make it a union of who they are.
Right.
A black person gets abused, they get mistreated in Minnesota, against George Floyd. All of a sudden, these are policemen who are trained by the IDF. And they do this with every single left-wing cause in America, whether it's blacks, gays, or any other group. And one of the questions I'd ask of the ADL, because they're so determined to make common cause with black groups, I said there are black organizations who are more pro-Israel than most Jews are. Why aren't you uniting with them? Why must you draw a common cause with BLM, who's an anti-Semitic organization? And last night on that webinar, they even said that BLM is part of their union.
Right. Absolutely. Can everybody hear him clearly?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, that's good. No, 100%. That's the danger that's going on. And when you mention the Anti-Defamation League working with groups like that, BLM, and ignoring our natural allies, that's a major problem.
Correct. Like you said, they are now supporting critical race theory, which is an anti-America. It's racially driven. And one of the reasons why there was such a political earthquake in America a few weeks ago was in large measure the critical race theory, which is kind of a new curriculum in American schools at elementary school level, teaching kids that America was founded on racism, that if you're white, you are inherently racist, and if you're black, you are inherently a victim. And this is a cause that the ADL is now supporting, and it's been written about by Jonathan Tobin to expose the ADL. So they have made common cause with every left-wing group that is harming Israel's interests. The language I heard last night on the CUPE webinar, it's all revolutionary stuff. They were calling each other comrades. And it's all Marxist language. But they have mastered the art of creating a narrative that we have never fought back with. How is it that after all this time, they have made Israeli apartheid stick? They keep repeating it over and over again. And what's our response? No, we're not apartheid. That isn't how you fight back. You don't bring a sport gun to a gunfight. You bring a cannon to a gunfight. And it's our fault for not attaching labels to them and making it stick. You have a Palestinian education curriculum which is sanctioned by the Palestinian Authority. How come that is the area that's driven home? Little kids at nursery, kindergarten, singing songs about the gloriousness of martyrdom and becoming shaheed. How is that not a part of the narrative?
Yeah, we have. Look, I agree. I think one of the biggest problems I have with this struggle, and I've said this to Meir thousands of times now since we've been friends, we don't fight this fight as if we want to win. And like all these organizations that raise money constantly to fight anti-Semitism, instead of putting it into like effective advocacy, they put it into salaries, and everyone sits around and talks about all the things we could be doing. And it's like, meanwhile, the other side, they're not anywhere near as organized as we are, but you look at them and what do they do? What do they do better than us? They have one consistent message, and that's that Jews are bad. That's the one consistent part of their message. Is it always boils down to how the Jews are bad. And we're trying to use all these other messages like, hey, you know, Israel's good at technology and look at all the wonderful things they do. And it's kind of like they show a picture of a dead baby and we start talking about how Jews invented cherry tomatoes.
I was just about to say that our biggest defense is the cherry tomato, which is ridiculous. I'll tell you also something else, Ryan. I was not impressed with the $25,000 spent on putting up banners on bus stops in Toronto begging people to stop Jew hate. I don't think that's a way to fight people.
Ron, okay, so hang on. I'm going to explain that.
I think.
Ron,
hold on.
Hang on. Hang on. I got to explain that because it was my idea. Okay.
Okay.
The point of those, the point of those bus ads was never supposed to be. And look, I can say it out loud because I don't really care because it worked, and then we didn't follow up on it, so it ended up not working. The point of those ads was not to say, please don't hate the Jews. The point of those ads were, as soon as they got vandalized, which a whole bunch of them did, what we were supposed to do was say, okay, hey, guess what? These say there's nothing about Israel in any of those ads. It's all end Jew hate, stop Jew hatred. So the next thing you know, all these idiots are writing Israel apartheid, free Palestine. There wasn't a single thing on there about Israel. And the point of that whole thing, and we dropped the ball again because the people that were actually supposed to be paying attention to this stuff didn't pay attention. When they were all vandalized, what would the message be from that? What should the message be from that?
Right.
It's not about anti-Semitism to these people. It's not about anti-Zionism. It is about anti-Semitism.
I don't think
anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and then it all boils down. And instead of actually saying, hey, look, why is it all of these bus bench ads got vandalized? We just were quiet about it. Nobody said anything. They were like, oh, you know what? It's really unfortunate. I guess it's unfortunate. Some of those, we had those strategically placed. We knew that those people were going to vandalize.
But Ryan, that goes exactly to my point. It was the concept in your mind was a great concept, but between the concept in your mind and execution in the end, and the amount of money that was spent and the ROI on the return of it and what could have been done differently.
That's the whole point, Ron. You can have the best plans. What is it Mike Tyson said? Best plan in the world lasts right until you get punched in the face. Right.
But we knew we were going to get punched in the face, and then we did what we normally do, which is not react, which is the problem I have. I'll tell you another 100%. Problem I have while we're on the show here now. I have a problem with the fact that for weeks there could be a bridge in Toronto that has flags of Palestinians, on it, unattested, anything. When we have grassroots organizations in Toronto, when we have official organizations in Toronto, not one organization went up to any of those bridges, confronted those people, called the police, and said, we're going to raise heck today. Because the only way we're going to win this fight is if we're going to start raising heck. It's not by putting up posters. It's not by waiting for them to vandalize. We can say, look, the vandalized our posters. It's by showing up and saying, you know what? You want to bring Gaza to Canada? I'll bring it back to you some way.
It's not exactly, Ron, it's not exactly like those groups that are doing that are advertising when they're going to do it or anything like that.
Yeah. It's like anything else. If you have a really great plan and you don't follow the plan is useless, right? It doesn't matter how smart we fight if we don't, like you just said, if we don't follow through. So we can come up with all these great ideas.
Then our community doesn't fight smart. Then our community doesn't fight smart. That's what it is.
Speaking of following through, there's something I'd like to say.
Yes.
As you all well know, there's been a spate of incidents in Toronto in the last couple of months. And the most recent one involved Mark Garneau Collegiate Institute. And this actually goes to your remark of your parsha, Meir, and I'll explain why. Shimon and Levi weren't very old when they did what they had to do. They were 13, according to some rabbinical sources, and that's where the bar mitzvah age comes from, because they were old enough to do what they had to do at that point. What I like to do is appeal to students, particularly at Mark Garneau, but at any school in the TDSB or even beyond the Toronto school boundaries, to do the right thing. Not asking them to fake anything or exaggerate anything, because that would certainly be wrong. I'm asking them to tell the truth. I'm asking and appealing to them to come forward and tell their story about how the incident at Mark Garneau affects their school experience. I'm looking for them to tell their stories about the adverse impact that they've experienced, because that is very important information that's relevant to several legal processes that are currently underway. So if there is anyone who's a student or a staff at the TDSB who wants to tell their story, I'm appealing to them to please come to me, approach them in confidence. They will not be embarrassed. They will not have their story broadcast to the world. They can tell their story, put it in writing, and they can send it into the appropriate destination. And they don't even have to copy me or anyone else. They just have to tell their story as they see it. And that's my appeal.
Yeah, well put.
It would be nice, but you know, like, I have to say this, okay? Because like this is kind of where I'm coming from when it comes to advocacy and the way that we're fighting this battle, which I think is really foolish. We have to be strategic. We have to be more intelligent than them. Look, we're outnumbered by a significant number. It's not a close number. We're outnumbered, vastly outnumbered. They can literally just repeat, like Alan was saying, they can just keep repeating every single day. If they have 500 people on Facebook talking about Israeli apartheid, and we have 10 people that are trying to rebut that, and we're trying to rebut it, like he said, when they say Israel's apartheid, and then we say, no, it's not, right? That's not a good argument. So like I wrote a letter a couple years ago while I was still working for an organization that shall remain nameless. And I wrote a letter saying, you know, like, if you want to talk about apartheid, Canada technically is apartheid. Canada has 2 laws for 2 peoples in 1 state. Israel doesn't. Canada has very little native representation in parliament. Israel has entire parties that are completely Arab, and they advocate specifically for the Arabs. They even advocate against the state that pays their salary. So these apartheid claims, like, we have all kinds of ammunition to fight against it. The problem is that these organizations that have massive amounts of money are not putting that money to the good use. They're not doing what they need to be doing. And grassroots people who don't have a lot of money, but we have the passion, we have the knowledge, we don't have the resources that they have in order to fight this effectively. And you know what? I'm not saying this in a mean way, but the Jewish community is the community that needs to step up. They need to say, I'm not going to donate money to organizations that are not doing what they need to do to fight Jew hate. Because the truth of the matter is, and look, I'm going to probably take flack for this. We're in 1939, right? We really are.
I agree.
Now we're demonizing Jews openly. And on social media, I look at this shit and I'm just like, how the hell did we get here?
You know, try to make sense out of this also, that we have the Scotiabank Arena, and Roger Waters, bona fide Jew hater, is going to be performing there. It's listed, he's promoting it, in the summer of 2022. 2 evenings. Now, the CEO of Scotiabank Arena is Larry Tenenbaum. He's in the Jewish community. He's a billionaire. He could certainly pull the rug and say, it's not happening here. Major League Baseball, they pulled the rug on Roger Waters. And that's just one example that I'm giving. Where's the backbone in the Jewish community? Where is Sija, B'nai B'rith to call on Larry Tenenbaum and say, buddy,
enough's enough.
This is what you got to do.
Yeah.
Can't do it. Have something else that evening.
Yeah.
But Meir, I don't think it'd be enough of just Sija or Federation or Simon Wiesenthal, any of the other ones, to send him a letter, to pick up the phone, to encourage the meeting. I think the community as a whole, and I think Ryan hits it on the nail. You know, if we wait for our leadership to wake up, which it hasn't woken up, you know, for a decade plus now, this thing has been going on and on. Anti-Semitism is on the rise.
I'm not necessarily saying to wait for the leadership. I'm not saying to wait for anyone. We've been putting it out there.
You know, when we wanted,
they are buddy with people like that. So therefore, let them well.
Meir, just let me finish the point. The point I was trying to make is, when we wanted to get the prisoners, Zionist prisoners, released in Russia, you know, when they were political prisoners there, you know, it was our community leadership that stepped up as well. But I remember here in Winnipeg, when the Red Army would come to Winnipeg to play around Christmas, and the community would come out, in the hundreds and thousands and protests and not let them come through and wouldn't let people come through. It was the community swell that changed things. It wasn't a letter from CIJA, and it wasn't a lunch meeting with Federation. It was the community itself that went out there and demonstrated and said, we need this, that pushed for action. And that's what we need now from our community. We need our community, if from the bottom up, we're going to start growing this, it'll swell up. But as long as the leadership, or what we consider to be leadership from the top, doesn't feel the fire underneath their bums from us, from the community, from the grassroots, from the average person, they don't see the urgency that you and I see to act.
I know.
So it's upon us to put the urgency on them.
I agree.
To act on our behalf. And that's what we're lacking as a community. As a community, as a whole community, we're not putting that fire under them to make them and to let them feel the sense of urgency that is there. It's not just there on May 15th. It's not just there, when there's an attack with Gaza. That's not just when the urgency is there. The urgency is there even more when those things don't happen, so we can deal with it before the fire starts. But we're always backwards. We're always reactionary as a community. We're not, proactive about this stuff. Now is the time to be proactive.
Ron, something else too that I don't think we talk about enough. When you talk about what happened when you were talking about former Soviet Union Jews and trying to help them, who were the people that helped drive that? It was the rabbis, and they were at the shuls and they were talking about stuff.
Excellent point.
Why is it we never see these rabbis saying anything in public except about stuff like BLM? They're so busy talking about BLM and social justice, and meanwhile, this rise of anti-Semitism. I mean, for God's sake. They're attacking people in synagogues. In New York City, they're attacking Jews in the street. And almost nobody talks about it because it's not white supremacists doing it.
Correct.
So, we need some leadership. And unfortunately, look, I've said this over and over. I don't think that the organizations are really going to do anything anyway. So I've given up completely trying to get them to do anything. But community leaders, you need leaders in the community. You need the rabbis. You need the people in the community that people respect.
Right. But don't forget that nowadays the rabbis are intertwined with the federation, which is intertwined with it's such a web nowadays. It's such a bureaucracy. My father used to work for a period of time within the Jewish community. And what he said, it's like grandma's chicken soup. There's so much fat at the top that by the time you get through all the fat to get to the actual soup, there's not much left there. And it's the same thing with our community. There's so much bureaucracy, so much fat at the top that to get to the actual soup, to the nitty-gritty, to the bones, to the, there's nothing there. By the time you get to, there's nothing left. By the way, Gary, can you put up that photo for 1 sec, if you don't mind? Gary and I were just, there's a photo just illustrates everything we're talking about CUPE, and I just want to put it up just before we forget. So if Gary, if you have it. Can't hear you, Gary, but I can see you, and you look beautiful, my friend.
I don't know what's going on with his volume.
Gary, can't hear you.
We can't hear you, buddy.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Now we can.
Okay. Just joking. Okay, here's a picture first at Ron requested.
Yeah. This is CUPE in a nutshell.
Let's see if I can
find everybody else.
Well, before the Ron picture, I'm going to show this while I go find the Ron picture.
Okay.
There's the quote.
Yeah, so that's it. So he's a CUPE leader. Viva Viva Intifada. Fuck Israel, supporters of Zionism. Oh, dogs. Oh, garbage. I will sacrifice my soul and my blood for Palestine. That's a CUPE leader.
Yeah. He doesn't have a soul.
That's a balanced perspective. That's a balanced perspective.
Yeah.
And then he'll talk at the Zoom meeting in a, low-key voice.
Call your call.
We have the videos of him.
Yeah, but again, Meir, who watches the videos? That's the problem. CUPE doesn't watch the videos.
And here's our contribution from Ron, which I'm sure he'll enjoy.
Yeah, so this is pretty much it. This is, everything in a nutshell, every time, even CUPE, right? Let's try and squeeze Israel into a random issue. It's not to do with it, right? So anti-Zionists always trying to cram Israel into any random issue. And it's exactly what Alan was saying as well before, it's any opportunity that you can court or you can take over and try to fit Israel into it. That's what you're going to do. This is my favorite photo nowadays, and it just speaks volumes to what's going on.
Yeah. I saw that in the chat. I did see somebody say they're more concerned with the TDSB, and I'm going to be honest, I am as well.
Yeah, I
because
agree.
they're trying to change curriculums now. They're trying to force this nonsense into being taught. And like once they achieve that, we might as well just fold up our tents, because I mean, at this point, guys, we're already fighting from behind.
And I just want to elaborate on that. My next little hobby is to start a project to get the Ontario College of Teachers to issue a professional advisory on anti-Semitism. Last week, they published a professional advisory on anti-Black racism, which I thought actually contained some valuable material in there. Some of the things that they said about political statements by teachers in the context of classroom teaching were actually quite useful, and I think they need to elaborate on that. There needs to be a clear professional advisory direction to teachers regarding their classroom advocacy of political causes, so that they do not exercise undue influence on the teachers that they, on the students that they instruct, and don't abuse the public trust that is placed in them. And right now, there's not really all that much guidance out there. It's a bit like the Wild West. Similarly, there needs to be a professional advisory on anti-Semitism, ideally one that incorporates the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And that could be a bit of a tough battle, but I think it's something that we can really focus on as a community. And so I've already been participating in a working group with a few elected politicians, and hopefully there's going to be some action taking place in that. And I welcome anyone who would like to assist and participate in that.
Absolutely. No, listen, it's all good. We have to push. There's no question about it. That's really the only way.
But Ryan needs to leave, so I'm going to put him on so he could say good night to everybody. So here's Ryan. Ryan, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
No, you know what? I appreciate it, guys. If I could leave you guys with one thought, it's something I said the other day on Twitter. I don't think people even realize we are the Jewish resistance right now. Like, we are the resistance. Mm-hmm. We're a small group of people that's trying to change something that has gone mainstream. We're fighting against anti-Semitism. And I think that people need to know, like, we're the good guys here. We're not trying to push our beliefs on anybody. We're just basically trying to prevent anti-Semitism from getting to the point where we're going to end up, which I believe, honestly, is going to end up like the 1930s. I mean, it's really scary. And I got to tell you guys, I'm staying with some Jewish friends in Toronto right now, and it really bothers me that you guys got to go through this kind of stuff, and that most people are just kind of oblivious to it. So, we'll do what we can, and we'll keep fighting, I guess.
Absolutely, and that's the reality. But also on the flip side, also Israel's getting stronger every day, and in every single direction. And I think what's going on, if I read it right, after this terrorist attack and the celebrations going on and the rioting going on right now in parts of East Jerusalem, is that we're on the cusp of repetition of what happened in May. And there's going to be more attacks on Jews, certainly in North America, as we saw in May. That's going to happen. That's going to happen on campus. Remember, campuses were closed last year even. So now campuses are open. So you're going to see that happening. And Israel, they're going to have to roll up their sleeves and deal with I don't know what other term you could say, but a fifth column. Because if you got riots going on right against you, working against the country and attacking soldiers and Jews randomly all over the place, as we saw in May, it's a very serious situation. But there's a lot of unity.
Ryan, before you go, I just want to say again, I commend you. Most of us, or all of us here on the show, are from the Jewish faith. We do this because it's our own lives are at stake here. You do it because of the passion you have for the truth, the passion you have for the indigenous people and ingenuity, and the passion you have for the Jewish people. And I have the utmost respect for you, for what you do, even if we might disagree sometimes on the concept of how we go about it. I have an utmost respect for what you do, because you put yourself on the front line where you don't really have to. And for that, my friend, we need more allies like you, not less. So thank you for everything.
Have a good night, guys.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Alan.
Yeah. So I was saying earlier, Nazism and the Holocaust because it cheapens the memories of the victims. But as Ryan said, the 1930s are here. The PLOPA has taken the playbook used by the Nazis to delegitimize Israel. When we interviewed Rabbi Cooper from the Simon Wiesenthal Center, I told him that I don't accept the slogan that it didn't start with gas chambers, it started with words. No, it started with the delegitimization of the Jew. And that's exactly what is happening now with Israel. The brown shirts who stood in front of Jewish-owned businesses and said, "Don't buy from Jews," that's what the BDS movement is all about today. When they say that we're not anti-Israel or we're anti-Semitic, we're just criticizing the Israeli government. That's like saying that the pogroms against the Jews from centuries ago, where they accused us of using Christian blood for matzah, like saying we're not anti-Semitic, we're just criticizing Israel, Jewish people's dieting habits. And that's what they're doing today with Israel. There's a difference between criticizing a government policy and criticizing a country's certain legitimacy. And that's something that we never ever fight back about. And again, it goes back to what we said earlier. We have allowed liars to create the narrative, and we don't fight back with it. All the examples you gave earlier, and Ryan hit the nail on the head, as did all of you this evening, that the Palestinians have one message. There are 1.6 billion of them, and they have one message: free Palestine. We have fewer Jews, and we've got more messages than they have shields out there, because we can't stick to one script. Every group has their own agenda. They have their own reasons for existing, and if they were to ever, God forbid, unite and coalesce behind one message, then they would feel like they're obsolete, and they would stop raising money.
Very worrying. There's no question
It
about
is.
it. Very worrying.
Yeah.
But, and to everyone watching, let me just emphasize this. We have no choice in the matter. We can't turn a blind eye. We have to be active. We have to speak up, no matter what. That's just it. That's how it is. And whether we get a snowball effect in the community and we get involvement from organizations, that's not the point. We have to do. And that's all. And that's been my life of involvement with fighting against anti-Semitism. We have to do no matter what, and we will succeed. And Israel will succeed, and Israel will continue to be strong. We have to support Israel. There's no question about it. Stand up against this vicious anti-Semitism, whatever the cost.
I agree with you 100%, Meir. Every Pesach we sing the song, "B'chol dor v'dor omdim alenu lechalotenu, v'akadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam." And we're here again, my friend, as the song says, "B'chol dor v'dor," in every generation they rise up against us, and in every generation, God above, puts out his hand and force and helps and protects us. And we're at that stage again here, and here we are, 1930s. I would say this is the 1930s, if not even a little bit beyond that. And we need to be resilient, and we need to be, active, and we need to make sure that as many people as that listen to our show and are part of what we do, that they join our fight. You don't have to be in the front line, like I always say. There's room for everybody to participate and help, and together as a force, we can combat this and we can overcome it. But as individuals out there all over, not united, it makes it much more difficult. But I think we'll win this battle like we've won all other battles. It might get worse before it gets better. But I believe in the Jewish people, and I believe in us, and I believe in what we do, Meir, every single day. And I believe that we'll be victorious at the end of the day, because we got justice and truth on our side, and we got history on our side. And survival is in our DNA.
Hanukkah, we're a week away from Hanukkah. And that's the minority standing up against the majority. And they're successful. And we light the candles. We light the candles that show that the Jewish soul lives. And the temple was rededicated. And the candle that we light is not a yahrzeit candle. Not at all. It's a candle that shows strength and continuity. And that's what it is on Hanukkah. It's coming up, and we stand by it. Last year, we lit candles in front of food vendors. In fact, we stand up to the BDS, no matter what.
You know, Meir, the candles of Hanukkah, you know, it's a very good symbolism actually for what we're doing right now. You know, when you think of Hanukkah, we start with one single candle that brings light into the house, into our world, justice, freedom. You know, by the end of Hanukkah, we've got 8 glorious lights that are shining bright with a shamash, bring so much power and light into our life. And I think it's similar to what we're doing here, you know, one candle at a time, but together as, you know, a united, you know, Hanukkah is a united force of candles lit. We're unstoppable.
Absolutely. Listen, like one of the positives, if you say positive, about the whole corona pandemic and all that, is that a lot of minds. So then we developed the show almost a year ago, and we're reaching people, and a lot of people share it. You know, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook. A lot of people share it, and we get the information out there. A lot of people wouldn't know any of this stuff if we didn't have a show. So every single week, and we got terrific people that come on that are knowledgeable and help educate the community, because, you know, unfortunately, our leadership, well, CJ, they don't have a show. They should, and they could educate the community. B'nai B'rith, they should all have educate the community and really let the people understand what the problems are, what the positives are, and what the negatives going on are, and the threats against the community are. Anti-Defamation League, do they have a show that's going on every single week to go through the issues? And we go through every single week all the different levels of threats confronting the Jewish people. We do that. So it's fantastic having the show. And like I said, it's we started it actually last year, I think the end of November. So wow, it's about a year. I didn't even expect.
May I just say one last thing?
Yes.
To everyone who's listening in on the show, first of all, thank you very much for your time this evening. I know you all have other things to do, and I really appreciate, and I'm sure everyone else on the show, especially Meir, appreciates your attendance. But if you do want to engage in advocacy on your own and make statements and express opinions, please don't say anything you can't prove. It doesn't matter if you really believe it, but if you make a statement about an individual that is disparaging even slightly, and you can't prove it, then you run the risk of being sued. And B'nai B'rith just received a Section 5 Libel and Slander Act notice this week. The issuer of the notice was bragging about it on his Twitter page. I think we all know who he is. We all know who his lawyers are. And it's very important that if you or me or anyone says something about an individual, they have the documentation in place to prove that it's true.
I agree with you 100%, Michael, on that point. I just want to add a caveat to that, if I may. You know, it's also Kim. It's a double that they landed on there. One was for Kimberly from Food Banders, who's suing B'nai B'rith, and the other one is the Villa from the TDSB situation that we didn't get around to speaking about today, but hopefully next show. I want to tell you there's something that both Meir and me have been monitoring, that part of their new tactic is to do exactly what they're doing with B'nai B'rith and with other organizations, which is to bring these libel lawsuits out to try and bog you down in court, scare you, frighten you. I agree with you that if you don't have facts before, you don't go out and make statements about people. But at the same token, we have to understand that, you know, there's a lot of different ways and means by which, you know, they fight their fight against us. We just got to be smart about the way we fight back. I'll leave it at that.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I have to be running, but thank you very much for having me on.
Well, listen, we've been on for about an hour and a half. Okay, so
yeah.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. If you could please share this on the different various platforms that you have, be it Facebook, be it any social media platform that you have. Please share it. We'll reach a lot more people. Thank you, Rich, for joining us. I believe we probably have a song that we're going to conclude with, like we do on every show.
Yeah, we'll conclude. I think just in the spirit of what's going on, and we'll conclude with Hatikva. Just wanted to show somebody who's pretty much known to everybody, a real philosopher in many ways. And I just want to mention that's one of the problems we have is the quote Jewish groups who support BDS. You look at all of these, and those are groups which actually march with the Palestinians, support BDS, and they're unfortunately a lot louder than we are. So we need to raise our voices higher. So a quick little video of just a commentary. They're specifically addressing the concept of politics, but this certainly goes over to the Palestinian protesters. So let me just play this real quick, and then I'll give you all a closing word, and I'll play the song of the week.
Horrible. It's worse than horrible because a zombie has no will of his own. You see them sometimes walking around blindly with dead eyes, following orders, not knowing what they do, not caring. You mean like Democrats?
I couldn't resist. So why don't you all put in a closing word, and I'm going to put on the song of the week.
Who do you want to start?
Go ahead, Michael.
Michael, they called you the voice of reason here
They call me the voice of reason.
So there you go.
I don't really have anything further to say. I would just say that please, if you have any information about any of these current controversies in Toronto, please let me know. I have already quite an extensive Rolodex of people that I can talk to, and I'm collecting that information to be used in several processes that are currently underway.
Okay. Alan?
He's not on the phone anymore.
Oh,
just
boy.
wave and say goodbye.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Meir, it's
Ron,
always a
go
pleasure to be on your show. Love being on it every week. I learn so much from all the guests that you have on the show. It's amazing.
Perfect.
I always say, the choice between being a prisoner or a partisan. I'll be a partisan every time. This is the hill I want to die on, and I'll continue fighting the good fight for Israel, for Zionism, and the Jewish people. Shalom to everybody.
Thank you.
נפש יהודי הומייה ואתם מזרח נדימה עין לציון צופיה עוד לא עבדה תקוותנו Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Israel